Good afternoon, everyone, or good day rather. Good day, everyone. Good day, Dr. Judy. So, in this video, I am going to tackle the Module 25 or the assessment strategies that can increase motivation and outcome based teaching learning. The objectives of this module: first, this is to cite ways to make assessment more motivating for students. 2. Demonstrate appreciation of assessment as a process to evaluate and facilitate learning. And 3. Explain how outcome-based learning or teaching learning or OBTL leads to effective assessment. I am Jay Estorno and I am here to report this module. Let me ask you a question. Do you find assessment kind of boring or tiring? Or let me say threatening? I think we all do. So let's talk about assessment. What is assessment? Assessment is usually at the end of the lesson plan. It is also known as evaluation. And assessment is at the service of learning. It is meant to ensure that learning takes place, and it is an integral part of teaching learning process. Not just evaluates the learning, but also is a tool to facilitate and enhance learning. So I have here an advanced organizer. So it says here the assessment strategies that can increase motivation. There you have growth mindset, focuses on progress rather on failure, clear objectives as the basis of assessment, self-assessment, criterion referenced, true purpose of assessment, sensitive and constructive assessment, and test challenging, not too easy and not too difficult. This will be tackled later on in this video. So is assessment motivating or threatening? If we say assessment is motivating, it means that students are more eager to learn something. Wherein if assessment is kind of threatening, it means that if they don't learn something or they didn't learn a certain topic, their grades will be affected. So that is why it is kind of threatening. So here, there's a question: how can we make assessment a palatable menu for our students? How can we make our motivation or our assessments more motivatable? Let's say, for example, students sometimes don't have the courage to answer assessments, or they might find it too difficult for themselves. So here, there are at least 9 assessment strategies that can increase motivation. One, make clear your learners' objectives every time. It is good if students are clarified on the objectives they are working on and the criteria that will be used in evaluating their learning. So this means that this strategy can increase motivation if your students has a clear vision of what is the objectives of the topic. 2. Make your student own the lesson objective. It says here that it allows them to set their own personal learning targets based on the lesson objective. Initially, their personal target may be lower than the learning target set for the class, but with the expectation that they will be gradually bring them up according to their pace until the personal targets coincide with the class target. This will make them feel unthreatened and more comfortable. 3. Engage your student in self-assessment. They have established their own target against clearly set lesson objectives. They are in the best position to determine if they have met their own targets and the class target or objective. When learners are given the opportunity to evaluate their own performance, they bring to mind the personal task and strategy variables applicable to them. They reflect on their personal characteristics that affect the learning, their learning rather. The tasks they need to work on the strategies that can help them. In this way, assessment empowers the students to take a more active role in their own learning process. So, it is very understandable know that we as a teachers, as future educators, we need to encourage them to engage in self-assessment because they are the only ones who truly know themselves. So four, practice criterion reference assessment rather than norm reference. Meaning that assessment that are based on criteria. Let's say for example, your assessment is all about a role play presentation of your topic, and you have presented the criteria, let's say for example creativity, content, teamwork, and behavior, which usually totals to 100% rather than norm reference or something like, okay, we will have a quiz to exactly know how much have you learned for our topic, something like that. Next, 5. Assessment is certainly based on established criterion if you are criterion reference. So this is relatable to the previous strategy. So next, 6. Inspire your students to have mastery focus rather than performance focus. So it says here that set their hearts on lesson mastery for the love of learning rather than on scores, grades, and performance. If they fail to get an item or items in the test, tell them not to worry and assure them that they will be taught again until mastery. So it is usually as based on my experience, I have experienced that teachers usually focus on performance-based assessments. So whether the students like it or not, they will be pushed or they will be forced to do the said assessment. 7. Have a growth mindset. It says here that believe that your students can improve. You cannot say that this is the limit of the students, but you must encourage them to surpass their limitations. Failure or wrong answer is welcome. Assure your students that they are not made less of themselves by a wrong answer or a mistake. What is most important is that they learn from their mistake and continuously grow and improve. 8. Your assessment practice must be sensitive and constructive because assessment has an emotional impact. Some teachers will just give assessments without taking basis or not what do you call this? Walay pake sa emotions ba sa mga bata. So if this happens, the students will lose their courage or their motivation in answering these assessments or performing these assessments. Why? Because you are setting them or you are making them into something like they don't want to be. Let's say for example, if a student is not good in in answering mathematics, why would you force them? I mean, why would you force them to answer, and sometimes other teachers will get angry because their students didn't learn something. So yeah, that is why. So that we must be sensitive as future educators, we must be sensitive and constructive on our assessments because wala ta kabalo nga sa ilang balay kay problemado na pag-abot sa eskwelahan, mura Japon ang ilang madatngan. So we need to be sensitive and constructive. Lastly, it's not the last one, but I think it is the last one. Yes. No, there are still two. 9. Do not make tests too difficult to discourage students. This is what I said earlier. Nor too easy to make them complacent. Let's say, for example, if lisuran, kay mo ana lang sila dito nga, ay dili na lang ko mo answer kay lisod kaayo, maka kuan pud ni makawala gana. Yung kani pong uban, if imong assessment is too easy, mayos lang, unya ra nako ni ansiran kay sayon ra man kaayo. So we need to balance that the low students and the high students, I mean their intellectual capacity in different areas, we need to take them accountable. So meaning that, yeah, what I said is not too easy but not too difficult. So meaning it is average only. Lastly, communicate results and feedback. A teacher facilitates learning by providing students with important feedback on their learning areas. So it encourages more students or makes students more motivated to do such motivation or to do such assessments rather if they will be given feedbacks. Usually positive feedbacks will make them be more motivated than usual. So let's go to outcome-based teaching learning. When a teacher implements OBTL, he or she employs strategies that can increase learners' motivation. But how? You may ask, unsaon? As future educators, what will we do? So in OBTL, the teacher begins teaching by explaining clearly learning outcomes, which are what the learners are expected to demonstrate at the end of the lesson as proofs of learning. Let's say, for example, your topic is all about dangers of alcohol. So your objectives there are describe what alcohol is, identify 3 types of alcohol, and perform criterion-based assessments. Let's say, for example, role play. So in here, we will be able to measure or to identify that the motivation of the students in outcome-based teaching learning excuse me, is high. So it says here that the students learn more about a certain topic if the outcome-based teaching learning is well explained and very clear to the students. So the teacher aligns. In OBTL, the teacher aligns his or her teaching learning activities and assessment tasks with the intended learning outcomes which were explained at the beginning of the lesson. So with this, it says here that the teacher aligns his or her teaching learning activities and assessment with the outcomes that are explained or the objectives. No? So it is very understandable. Next. In OBTL, there is a perfect alignment of what is taught and what is being assessed. So it says here that it is clear that there is a perfect alignment of what is taught, unsay gitudlo, and what is being assessed, unsay dapat makatunan sa mga bata. In addition to ensuring that learners fully understand the intended expected learning outcomes which are expected to be demonstrated after teaching a learning process. So, like, if we connect this to the assessment strategies that can increase motivation of students, we can relate this to the criterion referenced. If your objective was perform a role play, then that means the students can absorb more knowledge or can understand more of the topic being tackled. Why? Because it engages them to think more and to have the freedom to let them have the freedom to create, to what do you call this, to absorb the learning. And as a consequence, the students become more motivated for learning. So again, so there are 10 10 assessment strategies and that can increase motivation in assessment for students. Excuse me. And in OBTL, there is a perfect alignment of what is taught and what is being assessed. There is the explanation wherein teachers begin teaching by explaining clearly learning outcomes, and teacher aligns his or her teaching learning activities on intended learning outcomes which were explained at the beginning of lesson. As a consequence, students become more motivated for learning and more adaptable for learning as they understand more of a certain topic being discussed or being tackled. So are there any questions? That would be all. Once again, this is Jay Torino. And keep safe, everyone, and have a great weekend. Bye!